The beam from the projector cut a perfect, rectangular hole in the deepening twilight, painting the massive beige wall of the Maple Creek Estates clubhouse in 4,000 lumens of pure, unadulterated defiance. The image wavered for a second as I adjusted the focus, the whir of the cooling fan sounding like a battle cry in the sudden quiet of the evening. Then, it snapped into razor-sharp clarity. A 30-foot wide, high-resolution map, glowing like a beacon of rebellion. My neighbor, Dave, who was pretending to inspect his prize-winning petunias from a safe distance, let out a low whistle. From across the community park, a shriek of pure, distilled fury ripped through the air. Alexander Preston. I took a calm sip of the lukewarm beer I'd brought with me for moral support. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. I could feel the gravitational pull of her rage warping the very fabric of suburbia. Her name was Carol, and she was the reason I was engaged in what could only be described as informational warfare via home electronics. You're probably wondering how I got here, standing in my own front yard, projecting a county-level document onto a community building like a disgruntled college professor. It's a fair question. I wasn't born a revolutionary. I didn't move to the suburbs to fight a war. I moved here for a reasonable mortgage and the thrill of separating my recycling into 7 different colored bins. Believe it or not, it all started with a pergola. It began, as most suburban conflicts do, with a dream. A simple, beautiful dream. My wife, Sarah, is a landscape architect. For her, a backyard isn't just a patch of grass you have to mow. It's a canvas. And our backyard, in our new, modestly perfect house in Maple Creek Estates, was her Sistine Chapel. "I'm thinking a modern cedar pergola," she'd said one sunny Saturday, her eyes sparkling with the kind of creative vision I usually only saw when she was rearranging the throw pillows for the 5th time. "Clean lines, a retractable sunshade. We can train climbing jasmine up the posts. And, get this, solar-powered string lights for ambiance." I could see it immediately. Morning coffees under the dappled sunlight. Hosting barbecues where our friends didn't have to huddle under a single sad patio umbrella. It was the picture of domestic bliss we'd been sold in the brochure. "As long as it doesn't violate any ancient suburban treaties, I'm all for it," I'd said, fatally optimistic. "I'll draw up the plans and send them to the HOA. How hard can it be?" I now know that these are the last words of a fool. They are the suburban equivalent of a character in a horror movie suggesting they split up to search the haunted asylum. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, was an entity I'd only vaguely understood as a group of people who really, really cared about lawn height. The president, I'd been told, was a woman named Carol. My only direct interaction with her up to that point had been a week after we moved in. I'd found a crisp, laminated note tucked under my windshield wiper. It informed me, with the sterile politeness of a parking ticket, that my mailbox was, according to her laser measuring tool, 0.75 inches too close to the curb. It included a diagram. She'd drawn a little frowny face on it. This was the person who held the fate of our jasmine-scented dream in her perfectly manicured hands. I spent a week drafting the plans. I'm a graphic designer, so precision is my love language. The proposal I put together was a thing of beauty. It had 3D renderings, material specifications, a projected timeline, and even a lovely watercolor impression Sarah had painted of us enjoying the finished product. It was less of a construction proposal and more of a desperate plea for human decency. I emailed it to the HOA board, feeling the smug satisfaction of a student who'd triple-checked his homework. The response came 4 days later. It wasn't an email. It was a physical letter, delivered to my frowny-faced mailbox, printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock that felt both expensive and judgmental. I opened it, and my vision of peaceful morning coffees evaporated. It was a denial. I read the reasons aloud to Sarah, my voice getting higher with each bullet point. Reason for denial 1. The proposed natural cedar wood finish is not in harmony with the neighborhood's pre-approved exterior wood stain palette, which includes slightly darker cedar, slightly lighter cedar, and Sedona reddish-brown. Sarah blinked. But it is cedar, natural cedar. Apparently, our cedar is the wrong kind of cedar, honey. Item 2. The inclusion of solar-powered lighting constitutes a non-traditional technological fixture not explicitly outlined in the 1998 Community Charter. All outdoor lighting must be hardwired and of a classic lantern style. Classic lantern style? Does she want us to light it with whale oil? Sarah asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Oh, it gets better, I said, my finger tracing the final, mind-boggling reason. Item 3. Structural plans lack a signature of approval from a certified arboreal aesthetic consultant to ensure the proposed structure does not emotionally distress the adjacent oak tree. We stood there, in our kitchen, the letter lying on the counter like a dead fish. An arboreal aesthetic consultant, a tree therapist. This wasn't bureaucracy. This was performance art. It's Carol, Sarah said with a sigh. Dave next door warned me. He said she once tried to fine him because his garden gnome's beard was of an unregulated length. A sane man would have given up. He would have planted a sad little vegetable patch and called it a day. But as I looked at that condescendingly thick cardstock, a fire ignited in my soul. This was no longer about a pergola. This was about principle. This was about the fundamental right of a man to build a moderately fancy plant holder in his own backyard without consulting a tree whisperer. Okay, I said, a grin spreading across my face. If she wants a war of paperwork, she's getting one. I'm going to become an expert in the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association covenant, bylaws, and amendments. Sarah put her head in her hands. Alex, no. Oh, yes, I said, already marching toward my office. I'm going to read all 300 pages of it. I'm going to know that rule book better than she does. My first strategic move was to call in a professional. I needed a contractor who could give me a realistic quote, and more importantly, tell me if I was truly as insane as I felt. I found a company with stellar reviews, and the next day a man named Bob arrived. Bob was built like a retired grizzly bear who had decided to take up carpentry. He had a magnificent white beard, hands the size of dinner plates, and a look in his eyes that suggested he'd seen things. Terrible things. Probably involving unapproved shades of beige. He strode into the backyard, took one look at my pristine plans, and grunted in approval. Nice design. Clean, sturdy. Then I handed him the denial letter. He read it, and a sound escaped his lips that was somewhere between a sigh and the slow leak of a tire. Maple Creek Estates, huh? He said, not looking up. So, you've met Carol. You know her? I asked, surprised. Bob finally looked at me, a flicker of pity in his eyes. Son, every contractor in a 50-mile radius knows Carol. She's a legend. Not a good one. More like a cautionary tale you tell rookies. I once had to re-shingle an entire roof for a client over here because she claimed the granule pattern was, and I quote, visually aggressive. She made me replace a guy's perfectly good fence because the wood grain was too diagonal. The woman has a protractor in her soul. This was both terrifying and incredibly validating. So what do I do? I asked. Look, Bob said, folding the letter and handing it back to me. Her power isn't in the rules themselves. It's in the fact that nobody ever reads them. She makes up stuff like this arboreal consultant nonsense because she knows 99% of people will just give up. She feeds on despair. He leaned in conspiratorially. The only way to beat her is to be more annoying, more prepared, and more stubborn than she is. You gotta drown her in her own paperwork, find the loopholes, quote the bylaws back to her, show her you're not gonna fold." He clapped me on the shoulder, nearly sending me through the floorboards. "Call me when you've got the golden ticket, kid. I'm not bringing a single 2x4 into this war zone until I see an approval letter in writing." Bob's words were the fuel I needed. That night, my descent into madness began. With a pot of coffee and a family-sized bag of pretzels, I opened the PDF of the HOA covenant. It was a masterpiece of legal gibberish, a 300-page labyrinth of subsections, addendums, and clauses so vaguely worded they could mean anything. I learned things. I learned that my trash cans could only be visible from the street for a maximum of 4.75 hours on collection day. I learned that any wind chime I installed could not produce a note higher than a G-sharp, lest it disturb the auditory harmony of the neighborhood. I learned that my home, my castle, the single largest investment of my life, was technically just a long-term rental from Queen Carol of the cul-de-sac. But then, on page 147, buried in an amendment from 2011, I found it. Article 9, Section 4C. Residents are encouraged to adopt low-profile, eco-friendly modifications for the purposes of energy conservation. Solar panels. It was the loophole I needed. My campaign began the next morning. It was a digital siege, a relentless barrage of emails. To HOA Board. From Alexander Preston, 112 Oak Street. Subject, Pergola application. Revisions and bylaw citations. Dear Board, per your feedback, I have amended my application. Please find attached 3 new wood stain samples corresponding to slightly darker cedar. Furthermore, regarding the solar panels, I would direct your attention to Article 9, Section 4C of the 2011 addendum, which permits low-profile energy conservation devices. At a mere 0.5 inches in thickness, these panels are significantly less obtrusive than many pre-approved decorative fixtures. Carol's reply came within the hour. To Alexander Preston. From Carol, President, MCE HOA. Subject, your application. The Board requires physical samples of the stain to be viewed in situ at precisely 4:15 p.m. to account for the angle of late afternoon sun glare. This woman was unbelievable. I dutifully painted 3 cedar planks and left them on my lawn. The next day I saw her from my window, squinting at them like a skeptical art critic before making a note on her clipboard. The email war escalated. I found and hired the city's only arboreal aesthetic consultant, a bewildered botanist from the local university named Dr. Albright, who, for $100, wrote a very serious letter stating that my pergola would, in fact, provide the adjacent oak tree with a pleasing sense of companionship. Carol's reply, Dr. Albright's certification in arboreal aesthetics is not recognized by this board. We require a consultant from our pre-approved list. See attached. The attached list contained one name, Carol's Garden and Lawn Beautification Services. Her own company. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. This back and forth went on for 2 weeks. It was a full-time job. As this was happening, a new story began to dominate the local news. A tropical storm, once a harmless swirl in the Atlantic, had been given a name, Hurricane Brenda, and was beginning to look like it had a personal vendetta against our specific stretch of coastline. Then, the email arrived that changed the game. It was from Carol. Subject, urgent. Annual Hurricane Preparedness Meeting. All residents of Maple Creek Estates, in light of the potential threat posed by Hurricane Brenda, attendance at the annual Hurricane Preparedness Meeting is strongly encouraged. The meeting will take place this Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. We will discuss important safety protocols. The new, updated county evacuation zone maps will be printed and distributed exclusively at this meeting. Regards, Carol. President, MCE HOA. I looked at the email, then at the storm tracker on my computer screen. Brenda was now a Category 1 hurricane. An idea began to form in my mind. Carol had made this personal. She thought she could outlast me, bury me in paperwork. But she had made a fatal error. She had given me a public forum. "Sarah," I called out, printing my entire email chain with Carol and placing it in a very official-looking binder. "We're going to the HOA meeting." The clubhouse smelled faintly of stale coffee and desperation. About 30 of my neighbors were scattered amongst the folding chairs, all wearing the same expression of placid boredom. At the front of the room, behind a rickety podium, stood Carol. She was in her element, radiating the smug authority of a substitute teacher with a grudge. And next to her, on a small table, sat a neat, tantalizing stack of large, folded printouts. The evacuation maps. I decided not to wait. The meeting hadn't officially started yet. Armed with my binder of truth, I walked to the front of the room. "Carol," I said, my voice calm but loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "I'd like to discuss my pergola application." She gave me a thin, dismissive smile. "Alex, this is hardly the time or the place." "I think it's the perfect time," I said, opening my binder. "You see, I have here the receipts for 3 samples of slightly darker cedar, an affidavit from Dr. Albright, the city's leading botanist, and a copy of the 2011 Addendum, Article 9, Section 4C, the one about eco-friendly modifications." A murmur went through the nearby chairs. Carol's smile faltered. "My favorite, though," I continued, "enjoying this far too much, is your rejection based on the lack of approval from a consultant on your pre-approved list, which contains only one name, your own landscaping company. It's a bold move, Carol, turning the HOA into your own personal sales funnel. I wonder if it violates any conflict of interest statutes." The color drained from her face. She was cornered, and she knew it. The neighbors were now openly whispering. I saw Dave shoot me a tiny, terrified thumbs up. For the first time, Carol was publicly losing control of her narrative. Her voice was tight with suppressed rage. "This is not the forum for this. We are here to discuss community safety," she hissed, turning her back on me to start the meeting. As she did, I saw it. A movement so fast I almost missed it. With a flick of her wrist, she slid the entire stack of evacuation maps from the table and tucked them under her podium out of sight. It was a petty, vindictive little gesture. She was furious, and this was how she was reasserting her power. The meeting was a masterclass in Carol's droning brand of leadership. She spent 20 minutes lecturing us on the proper way to secure patio furniture. As she spoke, the wind began to rattle the windows of the clubhouse. On my phone, I saw a news alert. Hurricane Brenda was now a Category 1, and our county was officially under a hurricane watch. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, a woman in the back raised her hand. "Carol, you mentioned the evacuation maps. Are we going to get those?" A wave of assent went through the room. Carol put on a show of looking surprised, glancing at the now empty table. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "It seems there was a printing error with the maps. They're just not ready. A terrible mix-up. The HOA board will, make them available at a more appropriate time, once all the information can be verified." The room erupted. An appropriate time? The storm was less than 48 hours away. People started yelling questions. What zone were we in? Where were the shelters? Carol just stood there, holding up her hands and offering empty platitudes. Now, let's all remain calm. The board is handling it." But I knew. I had seen her take them. This wasn't a printing error. This was payback. She was withholding vital life-or-death information from 30 families to spite the guy who had embarrassed her over a pergola. As the meeting broke up in a state of confusion and anxiety, Dave scurried over to me. "I saw it too," he whispered, his eyes wide. "She scooped them up right after you talked to her. Her face was all pinched, like she'd just swallowed a lemon." That was it. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about bylaws or wood stains. This was about the safety of my family and my neighbors. And I knew with sudden, crystal clarity exactly what I had to do. The drive home was silent, but charged. I was vibrating with a level of incandescent rage I hadn't felt since my internet provider tried to charge me for a modem I had returned 6 months earlier. Sarah could feel it radiating off me in waves. "She hid them," I finally said, gripping the steering wheel. She looked an entire room full of people in the eye and lied while she had a stack of life-saving information tucked under her podium. All because I called her out on her gnome beard regulations. "What are we going to do?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with real worry. The news on the car radio was grim. The governor was holding a press conference. Mandatory evacuations were now a possibility for coastal zones. "It's not her information to withhold," I ranted, pulling into our driveway. "It's public data, it's from the county, it's for everyone." I stopped, mid-rant. My headlights were illuminating the front of my own house, the garage door, the office window above it. And through that window, I could just see the corner of the tool I used for my big client presentations, my high-lumen 4K short-throw projector. An idea so beautiful and so devious it felt like it was delivered by an angel in a trench coat, bloomed in my mind. "It's for everyone," I repeated, a slow, maniacal grin spreading across my face. I ran into my office and explained the plan to Sarah as I yanked the projector off its shelf. "The county GIS portal," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "They have to post all emergency management data publicly. It's the law." A few clicks later, there it was. A high-resolution PDF of the brand-new, updated evacuation zone map for our entire county. "She can hide the paper copies," I said, saving the file to my desktop. "But she can't hide the internet." Sarah stared at me, then at the projector. Her eyes followed my gaze out the window, toward the community clubhouse. It stood at the center of the neighborhood, and its largest, windowless wall faced the central park and our house. It was a giant, blank, perfectly beige canvas. "You're going to project the evacuation map onto the clubhouse wall?" she asked, her voice a mix of horror and awe. "She wants to be the gatekeeper of information?" I said, grabbing the heaviest duty extension cord I owned. "Fine. I'll just build a bigger gate, a 30-foot-tall glowing gate. It's malicious compliance, Sarah. It's public service with a delicious, petty little cherry on top." A slow smile spread across her face. "Okay," she said, heading for the kitchen. "I'll make popcorn." Night fell quickly, and the wind from Brenda's outer bands was beginning to whip through the trees. The air was electric. I set up the projector on a heavy tripod in our front yard, shielded from the wind by Sarah's prize-winning rose bushes. I ran the power, connected my laptop, and took a deep breath. Across the park, I could see Carol holding court with a couple of her board member cronies, no doubt recounting her heroic and entirely fictional efforts to procure corrected maps. This was going to be better than I'd imagined. I hit enter. A powerful beam of light shot across the darkness. The wall of the clubhouse, previously a monument to bland suburban architecture, flickered to life. I adjusted the focus ring, and the image sharpened into a colossal, luminous map. Our neighborhood, Maple Creek Estates, was dead center. The color-coded zones were impossible to miss. A thick red line indicating Zone A, the first to be evacuated, cut right through the lower half of our development. The effect was instantaneous. Lights flicked on in houses up and down the street. Doors opened. People emerged, pointing, their faces illuminated by the glow. Phones came out, cameras flashing, as people took pictures of the giant map, zooming in to find their own homes. The worried murmurings that had filled the clubhouse earlier were replaced by a buzz of activity and relief. The power Carol had hoarded was gone, blasted into the public square by 4,000 lumens of justice. And then came the shriek. "Alexander Preston!" Carol was stomping across the grass toward me, her face a mask of apoplectic rage. Her two cronies trailed behind her like bewildered hyenas. "What is the meaning of this?" she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at the projection. "This is an unauthorized use of community property. You are defacing the clubhouse." I took a deliberately calm sip of my beer. "Am I, Carol? I don't see any paint, I just see light. I thought I was performing a public service, sharing vital safety information in a highly visible format. You know, since the official copies were, what was it you said, a terrible mix-up?" Her face went from red to a shade of purple I had previously only seen on eggplants. She was sputtering, unable to form a coherent sentence. All she could manage was a threat. "I am calling the police," she shrieked, fumbling for her phone. "You are vandalizing and creating a public nuisance." I just shrugged, giving her my most benevolent smile. "Go ahead, Carol. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear why this was necessary." The swirling blue and red lights of the police cruiser seemed to momentarily overpower the glow of my projection as it rolled silently to the curb a few minutes later. Two officers emerged, a man and a woman, both looking profoundly weary. This, I sensed, was not the call they'd been hoping for on the eve of a hurricane. Carol practically lunged at them. "Officers, thank heavens! Arrest this man! He's vandalizing our clubhouse! He's projecting images, illegally!" Officer Miller, the taller of the two, held up a hand with the practiced calm of a man who had diffused 1,000 ridiculous arguments. He listened patiently to Carol's tirade about bylaws, misuse of property, and something about the unapproved glare. His partner, Officer Johnson, ignored us completely and walked across the grass to get a better look at the wall. When Carol finally paused to take a breath, Officer Miller turned to me. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were doing all the talking. They were saying, "Please, for the love of all that is holy, let this make sense." "Sir," he said, his voice flat, "can you explain what's going on here?" "Certainly, officer," I said, keeping my tone as reasonable as possible. "A hurricane is currently projected to hit our area. Tonight, at a community meeting, our HOA president here announced that she was withholding the county's new mandatory evacuation maps from the residents due to an alleged printing error." Officer Miller's eyebrow twitched. "Concerned for the safety of my neighbors," I continued, "I accessed the publicly available information from the official county emergency management website and am now displaying it for anyone who needs to see it. No property is being damaged. It's just light. I'm happy to turn it off as soon as everyone has had a chance to check their evacuation zone." At that moment, Officer Johnson returned. She nodded to her partner. "He's right, Mark. Map's legit. It's the new one from the county GIS portal. Zone A has a voluntary evac order starting tomorrow at 6 a.m. That's about a third of these houses." She gestured back toward the red zone glowing on the wall. Officer Miller's expression hardened. He turned back to Carol, his professional neutrality now tinged with unmistakable annoyance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now a few degrees colder. "He isn't damaging anything. This is public safety information, and frankly, with this storm coming, he's doing a public service. We've been trying to get people to check their zones all day." Carol's jaw dropped. But the bylaws, the glare, the unauthorized illumination." "This is a public safety issue, ma'am, not an HOA issue," Officer Miller said, his patience clearly evaporated. "There is no crime being committed here. In fact, Withholding this kind of information during a hurricane watch is dangerously irresponsible. Now, if there's nothing else—" He didn't wait for an answer. He and his partner turned, got back in their cruiser, and drove off into the night, leaving behind a silence broken only by the whistling wind and the whir of my projector. Carol stood there, motionless, utterly defeated. She had been publicly validated by me, and then publicly invalidated by the law. Her ultimate weapons, the rules and the threat of authority, had been turned against her. The small crowd of neighbors who had been watching the drama unfold quietly dispersed, talking amongst themselves, now armed with the information they needed to keep their families safe. Carol was left alone in the park, a queen with no subjects, her kingdom of beige crumbling around her. I switched off the projector. The wall went dark. Victory was sweet. The next morning, the world felt different. The sky was a strange, ominous gray, but the mood in our house was bright. My phone rang around 9 a.m. It was Bob, the contractor. I could hear him laughing before he even said hello. "Heard you put on a little light show last night," he boomed. "My cousin's on the police force. Told me the whole story over breakfast. Kid, that was legendary. Absolutely legendary. You got your approval." "What?" I asked, stunned. "Yep, got an email about an hour ago. Carol resigned as HOA president this morning, effective immediately. Cited personal reasons. The vice president, some guy named Stan, just wants this whole thing to go away. He said, and I quote, 'Just build the man's pergola. He'll sign off on anything. So I'm starting on Monday, and I'm knocking 10% off the price for services to the community.'" I hung up the phone, speechless. I had won. I hadn't just gotten approval, I had staged a full-blown coup. In the end, Hurricane Brenda took a hard right turn out to sea, sparing us anything more than a day of wind and rain. The evacuation orders were lifted, but the neighborhood was prepared. Better prepared than it had ever been. A few weeks later, the pergola was finished. It was magnificent. The cedar was a beautiful, natural honey color. The solar lights glowed warmly in the evenings, and the jasmine was already starting to climb the posts. Sarah was ecstatic. That evening, we were sitting under it, enjoying our first official pergola-sanctioned drinks, when Dave from next door appeared at the edge of our patio, holding 2 beers. "To the Projector Knight," he said, handing one to me. "The hero of Maple Creek, the liberator of the bylaws." I laughed, clinking my bottle against his. "I'm no hero, Dave. I'm just a guy who really, really wanted to build a pergola." We sat there for a while, the 3 of us, watching the sun set. I learned a lot in my first few months in the suburbs. I learned about property lines, paint swatches, and the unholy power of a 3-ring binder. But the most important thing I learned is that sometimes the best way to fight a ridiculous, petty tyrant who weaponizes rules to control the world around them is with a bigger, brighter, and much, much higher resolution.